Hello everyone, this is Timothy Mark with Alexandria.
How is everybody today on this awesome? I hope you guys are having a super awesome weekend. Good to be with you guys again.
And we're World Paranormal Research Society. The website's worldparanormalresearchsociety.org. YouTube channels, World Paranormal Research Society. Subscribe to our channel. In today's show, we're going to talk about runes, R-U-N-E-S, and readings. Alexandria is actually an expert at rune readings. One of the things that pisses me off about rune readings is that I keep hearing it's about Norse, it's about Scandinavia. No, that happened around 400 AD. With the runic symbols and the runic alphabet was actually finished and completed around 200 AD. 200 AD meaning AD after the death of Christ, which is AD after death. Alexandria will tell you that there was a rune found that dates back to 158.
Runic inscription, baby.
Runic inscription that dates back to, 158 AD?
150 AD.
But what we're saying is the alphabet was not completed until 200 AD. And it was Germanic, which consisted of a lot of European countries. So, with that being said, 200 years later, that's when the Norse and the Scandinavians, it became in that culture. So I've seen her do it. I've never heard her runes until I met her. She's done several rune readings for people at a lot of events that we've done, and every time she does the rune readings, people cry and they get upset because of how accurate the runes are. So, and just to differentiate between what a tarot reading is and what a rune is, so you used to do tarot readings?
Well, I didn't do tarot readings or tarot card readings for the public. It's more of a personal knowledge-seeking path in regards to, in our line of work that we do every day. It's always good to have a toolkit, or we call it a spiritual paranormal toolkit. So it's always good to know what maybe some clients may be dabbling in, like Ouija boards, so you can sort of get an action plan and know what you're dealing with. And Timothy gave us a nice history, and he did mention that the earliest runic inscription dated to about 150 AD, and really the runic alphabets were used to write various Germanic languages, and they were used before the adoption of the Latin alphabet. And it's a very historical fact. What I find very strange, and I'm going to delve into, it's going to make me want to seek more answers, is that the runic alphabet never evolved into a spoken language, whereas the Latin alphabet evolved into the Latin language. And I find that very, very fascinating, and I'm wondering why that happened. And maybe once I do some more research, we can do a future podcast into why the runic alphabet did not evolve into a spoken language. And few people today that I've run across, and Timothy and I have run across, have heard the name rune. They kind of look at you, they give you a strange look, not quite sure what you're meaning with the name rune. Some people that are of Scandinavian descent may know. Some other people that enjoy crossword puzzles may know. And if you're a huge fan or a reader of J.R.R. Tolkien, there you go. The light bulb suddenly goes on, and you figured, I know what a rune is. And Lord of the Rings, runic inscription on the ring, and a lot of different swords. And really, runes were employed at one time for legal documents, for writing poetry, inscriptions, and divination. Again, they never evolved into a spoken language, and I find that kind of why. And again, the word...
Well, let me say why I think that is. I think that is because it looks like a hard and difficult language to understand, because a lot of the runic symbols look very similar. Some of them are like, one of them looks like a staple, one of them looks like a lightning bolt, one of them looks, three of them at least look like a cross, and so one of them looks like, so it just seems like it'd be a very hard language to learn, even though it predates the Latin language.
Well, it's all about symbol and symbolism, and the runic the runes that I use are 24 runes, and they have the 24 alphabetic symbols. And a lot of you may say, hey, no, she's not right. I have a set that has 25, pardon me. The 25th rune is supposed to be a blank rune, and it is supposed to be Odin. And it's interesting to note that traditionalists say that there is really no historic evidence that a blank rune was ever used. And I find that, again, fascinating in regards to that. And again, the runes stem from the ancient form of a Germanic alphabet, which was used by the Germanic and Nordic tribes of Northern Europe, Scandinavian, and even Britain, folks. Even Britain. There's actually a breakdown, or 3 breakdowns into the various variants. And Scandinavia variants are also known as Futhark, and they're described from the first 6 letters of the alphabet in Fupark, and the elder Futhark are 150 to 800 AD. The Anglo-Saxon Futhark is 400 to 11 AD, and then the younger Futhark is 800 to 1100 AD. And really, ideally, when I do, and I call it a cast, I know tarot cards, they'll call it a spread, a tarot card spread when you're doing a reading. In rune divination, we call it a rune cast. And ideally, runes are cast on an east-west axis or facing the sun. So you have access to the east and west, and that's where you're going to traditionally lay a white cloth. I myself don't use a white cloth. They suggest a white cloth, but I have a very special rune cast mat that has Day of the Dead skulls, sugar skulls. I'm huge on skulls, so I really use that particular format. And we're going to sort of go back into history, really, and we're going to sort of the historical or mythological origins on runes. And as you may not know, some of you may know, Odin is the principal character in the pantheon of Norse gods, and his name derives from the Old Norse for wind and spirit, and it was really his passion, his transformation of his sacrifice of his self that brought the runes to humankind. And according to myth and legend, Odin hung for 9 days on the tree of the world. He was wounded by his own blade, tormented by hunger, thirst, pain, unaided and alone, until one day he fell. And when he did fall, he seized the runes, and that was a huge effort, and his last breath, or is almost his last effort, he was able to seize them. And it is said that next to the gift of fire, that the alphabet is actually the true light in which we see our nature revealed. So let's study that. So they're telling us that the runes are the true light in which we see our nature revealed. And that's telling me divination. So the runes are really a divination tool. And I find runes are far, far more accurate than tarot cards. And I'm going to really, really tell you why. I traditionally do a 3 rune spread. I know there's 5 rune spread, 9 rune, but I feel the most comfortable and I feel the most positive in getting or seeking an answer that my clients is the 3 rune spread. And really we're going from right to left. And at number 1 is we're really looking at the whole overview of something that may be concerning you. Number 2 will be the challenge. Number 3 will be action. So past, present, and future. And really, really, I get my clients to touch them for maybe 5 minutes, whatever they feel comfortable, and let the 3 runes drop onto the mat. And then I begin my process, where the first step is the rune name is given in the step 1, Then step 2, its phonetic value or a symbolic image is given to the client. And then finally, the esoteric meaning used in divination. So I'm really giving you past, present, and future. And I'm giving you the tools that you need to resolve something that may be weighing on your mind. So far, far more accurate. My particular rune set is made, it's custom handmade by Deer Antlers that is blessed under a full moon. So it is a substance made from the earth.
Yeah, and we're going to be in Austin, Texas at a place called King's Barbecue and Soul. And we're going to be there. She's going to be doing, that's going to be on Tuesday actually. And she's going to be doing rune readings there. She'll be doing the 3 runes readings there, which take typically about 15 minutes. And then there's another variation of the reading that you do. Go into detail on that.
Well, I'm more comfortable, like I said, the 3 rune spread where it gives the past, present, and future. And for that amount of time, I will give you an insight into something that may be troubling you.
But there is one that takes a lot longer, that uses more runes and goes more into detail. And we'd have to take those types of readings
by appointment.
By appointment. We won't have time at the event on Tuesday to do that for everybody. So, again, if you want to schedule an appointment, that's World Paranormal Research Society at gmail.com. World Paranormal Research Society at gmail.com. Shoot us an email and we'll try to book you an appointment.
So I find it very, very fascinating that to me runes are far more accurate than tarot cards. I've been a rune reader for 15 plus years, and I can tell you there really hasn't been a client that has come away, again, like Timothy said, not emotionally overwhelmed or something. I brought peace to a particular situation. And like many games that are really sacred or secular, runes are meant to be played upon a field, and I really mean that figuratively.
Hold on for a minute. Let me give everybody the address out there. It's going to be 2512 Rio Grande, Austin, Texas. That's in the UT area. University of Texas area. That's where we'll be at. Again, it's called King's Barbecue and Soul. There is a number, if I can find it here. Oh, the number is going to be 512-354-0101. Now let me tell you a little bit about King's Barbecue and Soul, man. They got some good briskets. They got some good creamy macaroni and cheese. They got turkey legs. They got chopped beef sandwiches. Very, very good place to eat. Check it out. Stop in there. Stop in there on Tuesday for sure. We'll be there in between the hours of, I think, 3 o'clock and 7 o'clock.
It's going to be an awesome location. So we're going to give you a lot of more than food for thought. You're going to have some awesome food, and then you're going to have the opportunity to have a rune reading. And I did mention that I focus on the 3 rune spread, and why I focus on that. And we have to remember that the number 3 figures very prominently in the secular practices of the ancients, and the 3 rune spread, according to Tacitus, was already in use 2,000 years ago, and it is said to be very satisfactory for all of the most demanding situations. So you're probably thinking, you're probably bewildered, okay, this is a lot of information to take in. Well, when you really dissect it, a rune is a symbol, and as we know, symbols are very symbolic in our every single day life, and they all have meanings. And I'm here.
And back in the ancient times, symbols had people understood the powerful meanings of symbols more than we understand it today, because it seems like we're so brain dead because of Facebook and other social media, Instagram, whatever, that we're so brain dead with these things that we've lost sight of what the symbols and powers that's held within the symbols mean. King Solomon himself used symbols not rune symbols, but he did use symbols. And the rune symbols has came along after Solomon's time, and they've proven themselves to be very powerful.
And when I started really working with runes, I really considered, and I really stripped it to its most basic foundations, and really what constituted a rune. What was the big idea about a rune? And at that point, you have to remember that it's a very special meaning that is present in a particular sign, or we call a glyph. And you may notice in this, I challenge you to look at this. And have you ever noticed that the warrior symbol, and that is Tizwa, Tizwa is actually used on our highways. It's actually horizontal, and it's used on our highways. And the rune for opening, if you'll notice, Kanu, the rune for opening, is also used on a series of sharp curves on highways. So without even realizing, on today's highway systems, we are using runic symbols. And I find that completely fascinating. And you may recall that actually the symbol that I like to say is actually for the protection symbol. And I ask you to look up for the protection symbol. They actually used it in the 1960s, but they had it upside down, and it was actually a rally symbol for the anti-war movement of the 1960s. So without realizing it, runic symbols have been with us since the very beginning of time, now with our highway symbols. So I really want to invite you to explore this unique form of divination and expand your horizons and realize that runes have influenced our very life since the very beginning of time. And just picture this in your mind: strange symbols scratched into ancient tools and weapons that are now laying idle or laying behind glass in museum showcases. And runic symbols really have the names of warriors, secret spells, even little bits and pieces of songs appearing on, from the unlikely places from Yugoslavia, Orkney Islands, Greenland to Greece. So I really find this fascinating. And actually there was some in regards to the word rune meaning secret, there was actually Bishop Wulfala, and I may mispronounce that, made his translation of the Bible into 4th century Gothic. He rendered St. Mark's The Mystery of the Kingdom of God using runa for mystery. So even in this translation of the Bible, the name runa was used, and we know that rune means mystery, secret. So really open your horizons to the possibility, and I'm going to take you into another world. I'm going to take you into a world beyond tarot cards and into a different...
And if you want to go into there's a lot of online stuff where you can research this too. Wikipedia has a great article on runes, and if you go in there and read it, not just read it, but if you look at, they have pictures of some of the very old, from the 19th century stones. I'm talking about big stones with runic symbols on them. I find that stuff fascinating.
Well, this is all about history, and I'm into history, and really before the Germanic people possessed any form of script, they used pictorial symbols that were scratched into rocks. So how many times have we seen shows recently on History Channel that have these pictograms or things that are inscribed on rocks and scratched on rocks? And these are really common in Sweden, these prehistoric rock carvings, or they're dated back to even the Second Bronze Age, and they were linked to Indo-European fertility and sun cults.
Yeah, and there's a lot of poetry that's been done with the runic alphabet, and here's one of them I'm going to read for you, and it's just part of an inscription that was on a stone. It was done in a runic alphabet, but I'm going to read it to you in English. It says, I know a 12th one if I see up in a tree a dangling corpse in a noose. I can so carve and color the ruins that the man walks and talks with me. So obviously that's a pretty deep poem, talking about a corpse dangling from a tree, and talking about the man that walks with him, and of course the stones was very important in that little poem there.
And going back to poetry, and again back to the legend of Odin, I'm going to read something.
Well, let me read one more poem. I'm going to read one more poem for you. It says, that is now proved what you asked of the ruins, of the potent, famous ones, which the great gods made, and the mighty sage Stain, that it is the best for him if he stays silent. Now let's look at this, okay? This was written around 200 AD. It's a poem written in runic symbols, and I just read it to you in English, but let's break it down a little bit. It said, that is now proved what you asked of the ruins. Now what it's saying right there is what you asked of the ruins. So it's telling you that there's a power within the ruins, and if you ask, you'll get your answer. And it says, of the potent, famous ones, which the great gods made. So there's a lot of power in runic symbols. But go ahead, what were you going to say?
Well, basically, runic symbols are used for
Hold on, let me do one more. Sorry.
He's getting all wrapped up in this.
No, because you told a story about Odin a while ago, and I want to read the poem of Odin. And this was the one that was written in runic symbol again. I know that I hung on a windy tree 9 long nights. Okay, now remember the corpse dangling from a tree in the first poem that I read you. Okay, so now this one's speaking of Odin. Okay, it says, I know that I hung on a windy tree 9 long nights, wounded with a spear dedicated to Odin, myself to myself on that tree of which no man knows from where its roots run. That's something that was written about Odin in a runic symbol. You got to realize that when we find these poems, when archaeologists and stuff find these poems, they find bits and pieces of the poetry, so you only get a certain amount of it. But this does back up the fact that there was a great belief of Odin hanging on a tree for nine long nights, and he was wounded with a spear, just like Jesus was.
So, we always like to bring to you in our podcast the similarities between different cultures, different civilizations, different religious beliefs. And I know that in one of these particular books, as ancient as they are, runes remain an open-ended system. And in time, the more you read up on it, you'll discover new ways and new creative ways to read them. There are some people that simply take one rune out a day to set their day. They meditate, and they've come into the tradition or the belief that before they start their day getting ready for work, they go for their shower, wash up, and they draw one rune a day to set themselves forward. And runes are a really way to channel divine wisdom, and these symbols that have been around for eons is a way that you can kind of channel divine wisdom, divination, and we're all at a time in the world where we're all trying to seek answers. Some of us may be losing hope, but through rune readings and a rune cast, I think it's really a reflection on the possibilities of what can be. Again, it's not fortune telling people, but it's just a way of using symbolism that has been around for many, many years. There was actually a lion in ancient Greece that had runic graffiti on it. So many, many cultures have used these tools.
Let's not now let's put that in perspective. She said runic graffiti. So now let's not think that in ancient Egypt or ancient Greece they were using runic symbols, because they wasn't. Somebody put graffiti in runic writing.
But I'm not saying the Greeks did that. I said they just when they became prevalent that for whatever reason there was runic graffiti on a Greek sculpture.
Okay, and for those who know me out there, I wrote a poetry book called Love and Horror. You can go to BarnesandNobles.com and purchase it by Timothy Mark, Love and Horror, or Amazon.com. So I love poetry. Here's another poetry that was written in Runic about Odin. It says, "No bread did they give me, nor a drink from a horn. Downwards I peered, I looked up to the ruins. Screaming I took them, then I fell back from there." So it shows that in the story of Odin, the runic symbols were very important.
It's very important too to realize that runes are very healing, merciful, and they will do you no harm. And once you learn the language of the symbolic runes, they will begin to speak to you. Believe me, when I first got my set and I was dabbling in runes, I was confused with all these symbols. But once you become more comfortable with the runic symbols, they will speak with you, and they will provide a mirror for the magic of knowing yourself. It's really a magic and a means of communication with the knowledge of your subconscious minds. And it's consulting an oracle. Instead of getting your fortune told, it's consulting an oracle. And
I want to say something too, that between 1890, modern times, and 1930, in Germanic mysticism, runic symbols were definitely an important part of their Germanic mysticism, magical practices and things of that nature. But go ahead.
And what I'm trying to get across to everybody is that with anything with tarot cards and anything that we do in our business too, is always magically prepare yourself prior to starting to involve yourself in your rune symbols. And whether it be a meditation, creating a magical space, it's very, very important to get in tune with the divine. And I'm going to read an invocation that can be used prior to giving a rune cast. And this was said to be on a rune stone that was in Sweden in AD 1050. And it says, "God within me, God without, how shall I ever be in doubt? There is no place where I may go and not there see God's face. Not know. I am God's vision and God's ears. So through the harvest of my years, I am the sower and the sown. God's self unfolding and God's own." So that's after, this is actually AD, quite interesting in Sweden and a lot of places, that runic inscriptions referring to God and invocations in regard to God. So that's another way that they embraced runics.
But also, if you look at academic study, it's funny because when you think of academics, you really don't think of like the Renaissance time or anything like that. Also, that was a very when was the age of enlightenment? Do you remember?
Well, that was really in the Middle Ages, basically, where the true age of enlightenment became, where people start to question the church, the Pope, the philosophy of the church.
But during the Renaissance era, they actually had classes, just like if you imagine going to Harvard or Princeton or anywhere like that and studying something. One of the classes they had was called Runology, and it was initiated between 1568 and 1652. It's a very big study of the modern study. It was called the modern study of runes during that time of the Renaissance. But now we look at that as way back. But so they did hold classes on the study of runology. And I think they're still doing it today in some colleges.
Well, there's actually a resurgence of old techniques and going back to the oracle forms of divination. And we're all familiar of J.R.R. Tolkien, who is the Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring. And this is a quote of one of his books, very, very important. "A king he was on a carven throne in many pillared halls of stone, with golden roof and silver floor, and runes of power upon the door." So J.R.R. Tolkien, in one of his books, Fellowship of the Ring, is telling you the very powers of runes that are carved on the door.
And I'm going to tell you too, in Kabbalah, which is basically a Hebrew. It's Hebrew. You have Judaism. You have what's called Jewish mystics, and in the Kabbalah, which I didn't know until recently, very recently actually, ruins was known as a holy or magical thing, and even in the Hebrew religion of Judaism.
Well, it does say, I mean, you may jump in here, Timothy, and please, by all means, that they're saying at one point that ruins are older than the New Testaments, and that ruins have lain fallow for more than 400 years. And actually... yeah,
we'll jump in here right now because, okay, we've already established that the first runic inscriptions, you said?
Just inscriptions, yes.
Was in 158 after death, AD, after Christ's death. So we cannot believe everything that we read in a book. Okay, now one of the things I am is I'm a biblical expert. I call myself a biblical expert because I've been studying the Bible for a long time. And I'll tell you this, the New Testament was started to be written 100 years. It started to be written 100 years after the death of Christ. So it's inaccurate to say that ruins are older than the New Testament. Although in Hebrew religions they do use it.
Make reference to it.
Hebrew religions make reference to it. However, it doesn't mean that it predates the New Testament. In actuality, the New Testament and the runic alphabet was coming along around the same time, kind of.
Well, that's true, and I mean, we don't know because the runic masters, I mean, a lot of the secrets died with them. I mean, it never became a spoken tongue, so a lot of stones could have been destroyed. We know that a lot of ancient stones were reused in building newer monuments. So, I mean, unless you were actually there, we really don't know that.
Yeah, we really don't know. I mean, you got these scientists that say, okay, this thing was created 158 years ago, 7 days and 3 hours. Well, I mean, shit. So how the hell can you differentiate when you're doing that much time back? How can you really say if you're making there's got to be a margin for error, like a 40-year, 50-year margin of error somewhere. So, but I do know that they do not predate the New Testament because maybe they predate the completion of the New Testament because it was not started to be written until 100 years after Christ's death. And the first inscription that we have of a runic symbol was 150 years after. So it could predate the completion of the New Testament.
That's right. It's all in the wording, and that's Timothy made a good point too, is that whatever you read on the internet and various books and publications, you can't take it as a word of law. I mean, these are just I guess what they would be is just suggestions. I mean, unless you were actually there at that point of time, we don't know. What we're trying to bring forward with these podcasts is make you seek answers. We invite you to join a quest onto seeking knowledge. I mean, we all know rune and runic alphabet has been around for a long time. They're a form of, they're a divination tool, and it's all how you interpret symbols. And this is another quote from T.S. Eliot from The Magic of Poetry. Runes and charms are very practical formulae designed to produce definite results, such as getting a cow out of a bog. So all these particular individuals like J.R.R. Tolkien, T.S. Eliot knew the power in the symbols of the runes. That's very, very important in regards to the symbolism. And we also have different sources telling us. And it's always best to take everything on a journey and to really expand your horizons. Again, to me, runes are the way to go, and it's quite hilarious when you see people's faces when you say, oh, I read runes, and they just go into the lost in space look. And runes, to me, are it when it comes to your divination.
I want to say this too. You just can't go out buy a set of runes and think that you're going to be a rune reader. There's ceremonial things that you have to do to make your runes powerful. And I've seen you do a lot of stuff with your runes that makes them, I think that's what makes them so potent and accurate.
Okay, let's capitalize on what Timothy just said. It's just like when you're using any tool in a tool chest, a saw or something. I mean, if you keep sawing with something without sharpening your blade, that tool is going to be completely useless. And for me, magically preparing my runes really heightens their ability to tell a story, and is very important. Again, my rune set were custom made from deer antlers. They were blessed under a full moon, and I actually recently had an opportunity to bloody my rune sets. There was a
blood ceremony, actually. It's a very spiritual blood ceremony, and there's a lot of imitators out there, and there's very few real rune readers. And Alexandria is a very real rune reader.
Well, I take the runes very strong, and I really prepare myself. And the preparation that I do prior to every rune reading really is a very ancient preparation. You really can't just get a rune set and just take it out of the box and just figure out I'm going to get the answers to all my problems. I mean, it really, folks, it doesn't work like that.
You just said it right there when you said get a rune set and take it out of the box, because that's not what you did. What you did actually is you had runes made from deer antlers. So right there, you having runes made from a part of an animal. This and so you're starting off. There's a lot of runes that's made off of different things, but made from deer antler is a whole different ball game.
Well, I mean, let's face it. Let's touch on that topic, because Timothy brought a very super important item to the table. Is that runes can be really made out of anything. There's people that will take it out of pieces of bark from trees, gemstones. You can go to the river and collect some stones that are a nice flat shape. They really can be made out of anything. But if you're taking something that comes from the earth, hence a deer antler, you're really supercharging your rune set to the maximum. And again, I do go through a whole ceremonial process with blessing it under a full moon. Now, most recently, they've been bloodied by a very old and ancient tradition, which I won't go into because some of you may find that
we won't
not
go
appealing.
into the details of that. And I think there's some things that we do as pros, and in our field is we're definitely professional and we're experts in our field. And there's some secrets that you just don't give out unless you know somebody. You don't want to give out too many secrets on a podcast. What you want to do is you want to take somebody who's very serious about doing this stuff, and once they become a student, because Alexandria you can take a class through Alexandria, World Paranormal Society, Research Society at gmail.com. Email us, World Paranormal Research Society at gmail.com, if you want to take a class on becoming a rune reader, and we can teach you how to do it in the most accurate and potent ways.
I mean, there's always a traditional or an ancient way to do things. And I mean, I have in the past, I've given seminars, I've given tutorials on runic symbols, and I'm going to just say something out there. I mean, I do have a book, and I'm not going to name the book, but people use the word Viking runes. That is completely inaccurate. They're called runes. If you're saying Viking runes, you're saying that just the Viking people had ownership of that. That is completely false. That's a prime example of you getting a book with a runic set, and they're saying you're going to learn the Viking runes.
The Viking way. If you Google runes, you're going to look up. You're going to see Scandinavian, Viking,
Germanic.
But what you don't. Yeah, Germanic is the key. What you got to realize is that 200 years before the Vikings or Scandinavians ever had it, it was already something that was in existence and practiced. So,
I mean, that's just somebody else riding on the coattails of symbols and traditions. So if you have a book that says the Viking runes, I'm very, I've got to really rain on your parade. There, that is not the true wording in regards to runes, because they're just an ancient form of Germanic alphabet. So the key word, as Timothy said, is Germanic. And I keep my rune set in a little pouch. It's actually a deer hide drawstring pouch, and the key is to keep your runes clean and keep them all together, because I've almost lost one of my runes, and that was almost the end of me there, because I figured, how am I ever going to get one?
I want to say this too. That goes back to nothing goes to waste. So you have a deer, you have its meat, you eat the meat. You have its hide, you use the hide for different things, and we've even used the antlers for the runic stones, symbols.
Right, and I mean, if we go into the different, I'm not going to go into all the traditional meanings of all the 24 runic symbols, because they all have different meanings. And if you will notice that some of them, there's the self, signal, separation. It's all about self-awareness and building on obtaining solutions to life's problems through yourself. And we also know that the Norse god Loki is also a source of divine utterances. So he's also in there as one of the runic symbols. So it's really about self-reflection, self-awareness, and divination, and being attuned with the divine presence and tapping into divine wisdom. And there's been so many movies out there that have used runic symbols without you even realizing it.
Yeah, you didn't even know what they were. You just seen them and you didn't even realize what they were. But they're out there.
King Arthur, in various King Arthur movies, in the sword Excalibur. Excalibur actually has runic symbols on the sword of Excalibur, and we know that Arthur is supposed to be half Roman. So we don't know. They're playing a game with the time frame.
But if you look at even in early Rome, not early Rome, but after Christ's death, when you still have the Roman Empire. A lot of the Romans, and actually, to be honest with you, it was a lot of it wasn't actually the Roman army. What it was the mercenaries who worked for the Romans. They had mercenaries back then. Their language and their writings were from the runic alphabet.
Because at one time, the Romans were hoping to annihilate Germanic tribes. Actually, the last people it is said to be really conquered were the Germanic tribes that they were trying to overtake, and actually they gave them a huge run for their money. So, we're hoping that these podcasts will give you new insight into the various tools that we have in our paranormal spiritual toolkit, because there's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of misinformation, and I really want you to do your research and just don't take the first source as a word of law. And remember that really runes are symbols that have been around for a long, long time. We actually use runic symbols, like I said, on our highway signs in regards to highways. So it's very, very important to seek answers and to expand your horizons and learn about something new, because
a good way to do it is to show up to the event on Tuesday if you're in Austin, Texas area. To go ahead, talk from there. Let me get the address.
You know what? We love to be approached by people that ask questions, because you know what? We learn something new every day, and we never stop learning. If you have questions about runes or anything, drop us a line. Come to the event and see us up close.
The event again is at 2512. That's 2512 Rio Grande, Austin, Texas. It's in the UT area. So we'll be there Tuesday between the hours of 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. So we won't be able to get to everybody. So if you get there early enough, you get a chance of getting your rune reading done. If you miss us on that day, you can always set up a class to be done through the email, World Paranormal Research Society @gmail.com, or to set up your very own rune reading.
And again, I will be offering the 3 rune spread. I mean, that's been very successful. We've always had huge lineups at every event. It's unfortunate we couldn't even keep half the people happy because it was just so successful.
We couldn't keep everybody happy just for the simple fact that nobody wanted to leave Alexandria. When she was doing the rune readings, you got to realize, if we're doing an event and we're doing a rune reading, she's giving you 15 minutes to do the rune reading. That's 15 to 20 minutes, right? There's people that wanted to sit and talk to her for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. But you got a long line of people trying to get their reading done. So we're trying to fit everybody in. And I think it's definitely worth it to come get your reading done. King's Barbecue and Soul, 2512 Rio Grande, Austin, Texas. This coming Tuesday, which is the date you said, the 27th?
The 28th.
The 28th at between 2 p.m. and 7 p.m.
And the purpose of this podcast, I mean, we could talk about runes forever and a day, but we want to really just give you some information, and we hope that you'll do some research. But there's nothing like coming up close and personal, seeing the runes, seeing how a reading is actually done, and getting a rune reading or rune cast for yourself. You know what? I've had people that once I set up, once I do my preparation with my meditation, my invocation to the higher levels, they are just spellbound by the entire process, and because they really don't know what's going on, and it's the curiosity, okay, what are these people holding in their hands, and it's just the interest in something they've never seen before.
And also, like I said, we had a long line of people, but remember, we're human beings, and we have a life. We have to go home at some point, so we have other things going on in our life too, and once you get so many people in line, I mean, you're not going to be able to get to everybody, especially when you're doing 15 to 20 minutes a person.
And then, another thing that I want to again touch base on is very, very important, because people, the first thing that they ask me when I speak to people is that, how is this the same as a tarot card reading? And again, I don't do tarot card readings to the public. I mean, I have several sets on myself, and I find them very, very fascinating. But I find the difference between tarot card reading and a rune cast is that the tarot card reading is very impersonal, and the rune cast is very personal, because I have the individual that is actually touching a part of nature, and I ask that my clients hold them for around 5 minutes or whatever is comfortable, and you're being in tune with this particular material. So very, very important, highly accurate, very, very important. I mean, anybody can read a tarot card. I'm not downplaying. Don't get the wrong idea, folks. I am not down on tarot card readers. But really, it's not fortune telling. We really can't tell the future. Nobody can. But tarot cards are very inaccurate in my mind. And I'll leave it at that, because the rune cast is more highly suggestive, more personal, and it's just more in tune with the universe and the individual, my client, that I'm dealing with.
So with that, we're going to wrap this up. We've been so busy lately that we couldn't even keep up with the podcast. So,
and you know what? I'm going to jump in, and I got to say, really kudos to Timothy. It just seems that, these, he knows that I'm very, very passionate about runes, and I really have to commend him for doing research and finding some information out, because I'm trying to learn more about the Bible. Like I said, I'm more fascinated, and I need to learn, because knowledge is power. I have to start reading the Bible more, because there's a lot of secrets in there. But very important that Timothy is really, I'm very amazed and thankful that he does take the time to do research on the topics that are passionate to me, and I'll return the favor to him. And we can only hope that our listeners, you will begin to ask questions, because there's answers, there's secrets, there's symbols all around you.
And again, the product for today that we want to put out there, it's my poetry book, Love and Horror. It's at barnesandnobles.com, and it's at Amazon.com. I prefer you get it from Amazon.com, but it's on. It's called Love and Horror, and it's by Timothy Martin. Alexandria's released a book. The Blood Countess? That's out there now, right? This re-revised is out there.
The Blood Countess has been re-revised, and I would really encourage all of you. I mean, Timothy also has a book on Vlad the Impaler, but this is the female counterpart, is the Blood Countess. Very, very factual, historic. I think this lady rocks.
And Alexandria wrote a book to benefit the health of men. A portion of the profit goes into benefiting the health of men, and it's called The Allure of Hairy Men.
And you know, folks, I gotta say, I'm really proud of the book. Some people have raised their eyebrows, but we really have to raise the awareness in regards to men's health issues. I've been in contact with Movember. They were grateful that I've done this book, so hopefully a lot of support for raising the awareness in regards to men's health issues. Super, super important. The Allure of Hairy Men. You know what? It's well worth it, and it'll spellbound you.
All right, that's it for now. See you next time.
Take care, everybody. What do you think?
Yeah, thank you.